Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed. 2 more Palestinians have just been arrested breaching the Gaza fence and entering Israeli territory. This comes just ahead of tomorrow's massive protest along the Gaza border, and these suspects were reportedly carrying a knife and wire cutters, marking the 4th such infiltration of Palestinians from Gaza this week alone. The frequency of these breaches is even more alarming, considering the IDF has only beefed up its security measures along the border. Clearly, tensions inside the Strip ahead of the massive 6-week protest set to begin tomorrow is only getting worse. The terror group is rallying citizens to various tent cities along the border to commemorate Land Day, the anniversary of Israel's 1976 appropriation of Galilee land, which happens to overlap with the eve of Passover.
هدفنا الأول والأخير هو إيصال رسالة بأنه لا يضيع حق وراءه مطالب، وبأن أقصى أمنياتنا هو العودة إلى مدننا الفلسطينية وقرانا الفلسطينية التي هاجر منها أجدادنا قسرا.
The army is gearing up for what could possibly be the bloodiest clashes in quite some time. Nearly 100 snipers authorized to use live fire if they see breaches in progress have been stationed around the Strip. Additional troops have also been supplemented to the army's usual posts, which include special combat units. Hamas has called this demonstration a peaceful sit-in, despite their militia's largest ever live fire drill earlier this week. Given this breakout of infiltrations, it's clear neither Hamas nor Israel believe much of this will be peaceful at all. Starting off with a bit of breaking news, Israeli tanks have just shelled Hamas military sites in the Gaza Strip. This is in response to an incident in which 2 Palestinians in the Strip lit a platform on fire near the security border with Israel. The platform is connected to a now defunct border crossing checkpoint. Even though the site is abandoned, the IDF says that any attempt to harm the security infrastructure between Israel and Gaza is taken very seriously. Army spokespeople have emphasized that this incident happened within the Strip and did not breach Israeli territory. This is likely to suppress fears that yesterday's shocking infiltration of 3 Palestinians from Gaza into Israel is more than just a fluke. Tensions between Israel and the Palestinians have reached a boiling point ahead of this weekend's protests that are scheduled to see thousands of Palestinians along the borders with Gaza and the West Bank. Yesterday's security breach remains an embarrassing and troubling incident that the army hopes not to allow a second time. The latest census numbers have just come in, and the shocking results may have major political reverb. The study suggests that the number of Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, when added to the Arab Israelis living in Israel, is now nearly equal to the number of Jews living in the Holy Land. Some are disputing these numbers, but the question of Israel's identity as a Jewish state has nonetheless surged to the top of the national debate. If a population parity has been reached, it would mean that Jews no longer hold a demographic majority in the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Some Israeli lawmakers say this may herald a new age in Israel's future, in which the country sacrifices democracy for the sake of maintaining its Jewish identity, namely by possibly refusing Arab citizens the right to vote. Other Knesset members and analysts argue that a population parity exposes the impossibility of annexing the West Bank for a one-state solution, because Jews would then be forfeiting their own majority.
And I insist, the moment we will annex the West Bank and Gaza, we will be a minority, and this is the end of the Zionist dream.
Growing settlements in disputed parts of the West Bank with an eye on annexing areas of the West Bank altogether has been largely condemned as illegal by most of the world, but remains a top objective of Netanyahu's administration. Arab Knesset members say these numbers reflect a very harsh truth. If Israel doesn't opt for the 2-state solution, the risk falls on both Jews and Palestinians. Both the IDF and the Palestinians are bracing for what could potentially be a very bloody showdown starting this weekend. The United Nations is begging both sides to de-escalate and avoid violence, particularly involving children. Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank will commemorate Land Day this weekend by holding a massive demonstration along the border. Land Day marks the anniversary of Israel's expropriation of Galilee land, and Hamas says this protest will be merely a peaceful sit-in. But considering Hamas's militia has just conducted its first ever live fire drill in the Strip, that seems unlikely. That drill triggered the Iron Dome to accidentally misfire nearly $1 million worth of defensive rockets. The army says the ammunition fire in Gaza was misread as rocket fire and that the system's oversensitivity is merely an extra safety precaution. But it comes at a time when Hamas is certainly looking for weaknesses in Israel's impenetrable defensive system. Another possible red flag is the ramped Hamas security on the Erez border checkpoint between Gaza and Israel. Hamas initially handed over all checkpoints to the PA during the unity deal, but now that the deal is dissolving, Hamas seems to be seizing power back. The Palestinians' protest happens to overlap with the eve of Passover, which begins this Friday at sundown.
Unconfirmed reports coming in now say Israeli jets have just struck Hezbollah military targets along the Syria-Lebanon border. The terror group denies any airstrikes took place, and Lebanese sources say the sounds heard in the night may have been from jets breaking the sound barrier. But Arab media says Israeli jets were spotted dropping bombs on a number of positions inside Lebanon.
As per Army policy, the IDF has remained mum on confirming or denying these rumors. But airstrikes in the region would certainly fall in line with the Army's northern strategy as of late. Hezbollah forces backed with Iranian money have been mobilizing throughout the region. Although neither side is believed to be gearing up for a war necessarily, everyone is prepared at all times. Israel has taken a decisively proactive approach lately to eliminate northern threats before the danger becomes too great. To that end, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has just announced that his troops actually need more funds to properly secure the situation brewing in Syria and Lebanon. That area is undoubtedly the most volatile threat facing Israel today.
Well, it looks like Hamas is gearing up for what could be a dark and bloody clash with Israeli police this weekend. The terror group is amassing thousands along the Gaza border ahead of a protest set for this weekend, which happens to collide with the eve of Passover. Hamas has just conducted a live-fire military drill that was so big it actually set off Israel's Iron Dome.
The unprecedented size of the drill signals that Hamas is gearing up for very serious violence this weekend. Soldiers from the group's military wing could be seen practicing anti-tank maneuvers and testing out at least one rocket by firing it into the sea. The amount of gunfire was massive enough that it triggered alarms all over Israel's southern border, activating the Iron Dome defense system, and even launched defense rockets into the sky. Hamas says its protest this weekend, which commemorates the day in 1976 that Israel expropriated land in the Galilee, is merely a peaceful sit-in. But by conducting its first ever live fire drill in the Strip and Israel beefing up its defense, it's obvious that neither side really believes those words.
Well, it's finally happened. The American Congress has just passed the Taylor Force Act, meaning the U.S. will now slash funds to the Palestinian Authority unless they stop paying salaries to Palestinian terrorists and their families. This major cut now ensures that no U.S. money will ever be used to create an incentive for Palestinian terrorists.
The act passed on Friday as part of Congress's omnibus budget bill. It takes its name from former U.S. Army officer Taylor Force, who was murdered 2 years ago by a Palestinian terrorist during a trip to Israel. The bill amassed massive bipartisan support from both Republicans and Democrats alike ever since. Though Palestinian leaders have already expressed their outrage, U.S. lawmakers hope the new law will help curb violence against Israeli citizens. The Palestinian Authority is well known for diverting massive amounts of money to families of terrorists who are killed in the act, as well as paying stipends for those put in prison. Attacking President Abbas's wallet may put the right kind of pressure on the Palestinians. But given recent cuts to the UN's refugee agency for the Palestinians, as well as President Trump's controversial Jerusalem decision, some worry that this may spiral the region into a desperate and violent situation. Others say this is merely a much-needed dose of reality for Palestinian leadership to finally accept.
All right. As if you needed any more proof of the strength of the Israeli-U.S. friendship, Congress has just approved a massive record-high funding boost to Israel's military. Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman broke the news himself. This year, America will send a jaw-dropping $705 million to help protect Israel's borders.
That's nearly $150 million up from last year's budget. The Defense Ministry has confirmed these funds will go directly towards beefing up Israel's Iron Dome defense system. There's an upgrade in the Iron Dome already underway to make the Arrow 3 missile system more accurate and also boost the system's overall range. Coincidentally, tests for that upgrade will commence in Alaska this summer in coordination with the United States. Lieberman has thanked the U.S. for investing $6.5 billion to date in Israel's defense. The United States has an additional stake in perfecting the Iron Dome. Rumors have long been swirling that America may set up its own Iron Dome system over U.S. soil in the future. Numerous countries have been reportedly vying for their own Iron Dome tech as well, which means America's investment could be worth even bigger bucks someday soon.
Hundreds of expats here in Israel have just marched alongside their fellow Americans to rally for gun control reform in the wake of what many say is an epidemic of mass shootings in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have taken part in the March for Our Lives all over the world, and several survivors of last month's horrific massacre at a high school in Parkland, Florida, were actually here in Tel Aviv to help rally the crowd.
I go to Douglas, and my class was shot into. I was one of the first rooms who got shot, and 3 kids in my class died. And it's just been really hard because I saw things that no 14-year-old should ever have to see.
The marches seen around the world demonstrate possibly the single largest cry for gun control reform in recent U.S. history. President Trump and Republican leadership have come under fire for allegedly failing to tackle these reforms against the NRA, the most dominant gun lobby on Capitol Hill. Trump initially voiced opposition against the NRA, only to 180 several days later, suggesting instead to arm public school teachers as a means to thwart school shooters. Congress's latest spending bill, which was just signed into law by Trump, includes measures to improve background checks for buying a weapon. But retailers such as Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods have already gone several steps further and banned the sale of assault weapons from their stores altogether. Many have pointed out how Israel's tight gun control laws and historically low school shootings may be a prime example for America to follow. Given the massive numbers seen all over the world at yesterday's march, clearly this is an issue personal to many.
Thousands of Parisians took to the streets yesterday to protest the growing anti-Semitism in France, as well as to mourn the loss of murdered Holocaust survivor Muriel Knoll. Knoll was stabbed dead and then burnt in her apartment when the attackers allegedly set fire to her home after the murder last Friday. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on the story. So, Aaron, has this attack officially been termed anti-Semitism?
As of this point in the investigation, it has not been termed anti-Semitism, but it is largely thought to be anti-Semitism at this point in the investigation. That being said, I mean, they're still pulling out a lot of the details of the attack. It could be more personal. It could be less, religiously motivated. As we know, 2 suspects have already been detained in the attack, one of which was actually convicted prior for sexually molesting a 12-year-old girl who was staying with Knoll previously in the past.
Right, well, let's go back to the march now. Protesters are voicing increased concern over the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks in France. What is being done about it?
Well, I mean, that depends on who you ask, of course. But that being said, the government has, since 2015, unveiled a €100 million initiative to try and combat anti-Semitism, discrimination, racism, etc. Part of that was deploying hundreds of police officers and soldiers across Jewish communities and in front of their schools and synagogues and things like that. And anti-Semitism actually in that time has been reduced by 58% nearly. And hate crimes
overall
in general, have been reduced by 44%.
Yeah, well, obviously the people of France clearly don't feel like enough is being done. The case in point is that Muriel Knoll herself actually reported to the police that she had been threatened with arson, and then this happened.
And that is actually part of the problem, is that a lot of the people have lost faith in the police to enforce protections of against anti-Semitism, things like that, which actually may even account for why the number of anti-Semitism reports have been reduced, because maybe those reports just aren't being made, even though they might still be happening. And then on the other hand, that might also explain why you had such antagonism at the march against certain politicians.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Aaron, with the update. The probes into the alleged corruption committed by Prime Minister Netanyahu has intensified. Earlier this week, Netanyahu's wife Sarah and son Yair were questioned by police as official suspects in Case 4000. That case alleges that the Prime Minister gave benefits to the Israeli telecom giant Bezek, all in exchange for favorable news coverage. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the latest updates. And Brett, how exactly are Netanyahu's wife and son involved here?
Well, to be questioned as suspects in the case means they could potentially be very involved here. Apparently, the police have evidence suggesting that both Sarah and Yair Netanyahu facilitated these deals between the PM's office and Bezek personnel through the Prime Minister's former media advisor, and that would be Neil Hefetz, who was arrested last month and recently turned state's witness. And that's a huge development in here because,
I understand that Hefetz has apparently presented police with all kinds of recordings and text messages, some possibly even from Sarah and Yair Netanyahu personally. Now, what does Netanyahu, or I guess what do the Netanyahus as a family say about this?
Right. Well, the Prime Minister has stuck to that mantra that, there's nothing here, there's nothing going to be here. But this is where things get tricky for Yair and Sarah, because they're both also suspected of deleting these texts from their phones to potentially cover up evidence, which would obviously be quite serious.
Yeah, that would be obstructing an investigation.
Correct. Now, as part of that interrogation that happened this week on Monday, they were presented with those texts from the state's witness. Both wife and son said something along the lines of, well, what's wrong with wanting the coverage of my family? To be positive, that's not a crime. But it is a crime if they arranged deals and then knowingly deleted evidence of it. Yair Netanyahu claims he didn't delete any evidence. Sarah Netanyahu has told police that she didn't delete any single one message, merely large chunks of data in order to clear space on her phone.
Now, I want to point something out here, something the Netanyahu family has decried again and again here, which is that their family is being unfairly persecuted in the media. I mean, we've had not one, but two very incriminating recordings of both Sarah and Yair Netanyahu leaked to the press recently. And the details that we're talking about here, these are from inside an ongoing police investigation. Has this all become a witch hunt, like Netanyahu says, in your opinion?
Look, on one hand, you're talking about the freedom of the press, and that freedom exists, in some part anyway, to keep our systems honest. And ironically, that's exactly the institution Netanyahu himself is accused of compromising in his favor now. Now, on the other hand, some of the things that do seem to leak out to the media do feel kind of personal, like this tape you're saying, the tape of Sarah Netanyahu screaming at her aide that leaked in January. I mean, think of that what you will, but it doesn't really have any impact on these police investigations. The recording of Yair, on the other hand, that mentioned a gas deal, and that could be a different story, but obviously this is in itself a larger discussion.
Yeah, a lawyer representing Sarah and Yair Netanyahu has filed a complaint against the police demanding an investigation into those alleged leaks. But with these corruption probes still a very pressing issue, I have a feeling more developments are still on the way. All right, thanks for the update, Brett.
Sure.
All right, well, there is positive news specifically for the former residents of the Amona settlement. The first 25 families of those evacuated from the outpost last year will be entering their new homes today in Amichai. The remaining 17 families are slated to make the move next month, over or after the Passover holidays. And ILTV's Aaron Porras joins us with more.
Thank you, Natasha. And I'll start off by saying that while it's good news for the former Amona residents, it's very threatening news for West Bank Palestinians.
Of course. Well, what is the problem with the new Amichai settlement?
So the Amona settlement was ordered to be demolished because it was sitting on private Palestinian lands. That was an Israeli court order. But the Amichai settlement is essentially facing the exact same accusations for at least a third of the property that it sits on top of. Add to that the regulations bill, which was passed a little last year, and you can see that it puts a lot of Palestinians in a very precarious situation.
Well, and it doesn't seem like there's much that can be done to fight this transfer. Have there been abuses since the passing of this regulations law? I mean,
there have been, of course, some alleged abuses with the regulations bill. Of course, the regulations bill essentially allows the state of Israel to expropriate any lands that illegal outposts have been settled on, and just this year, nearly 2,800 units have been built. 78% nearly on lands that would either need to be returned in a future peace deal, and nearly 10%
just completely illegally and without Israel's backing. So you're seeing a lot of land that could potentially be taken. It's worrying for Palestinians.
How many units are normally built in the West Bank annually? And expansion seems to be almost normal nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, expansion is a normal thing for any growing population. But just this past year, again, I mentioned nearly 2,800 units were being approved in the past year in the West Bank. Well, that's a 17% raise over the average over the last decade.
Yeah.
So that's quite a bit. And again, nearly 8% of that is unauthorized.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us with more information about this. All right, after millions of back and forth reports, it's finally happened. Air India Flight 139 has just made history by being the first to fly straight from New Delhi to Tel Aviv through Saudi airspace. It's also the first Air India flight to come to Israel in over 20 years.
The new historic route marks the end of a 70-year ban on flights either going to or coming from Israel, from flying over the Saudi kingdom. Riyadh has still not confirmed allowing the new route, but future flights on the Indian airline are still being scheduled for sale. Both the Indian ambassador to Israel as well as Transportation Minister Israel Katz praise a momentous occasion, hailing it as a first and many good things to come from the growing Israel-India relationship. But Katz, along with many others, also sees the new flights as a sign of the inching progress between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So far, there are still no El Al flights allowed to go to or over Saudi Arabia, but after this, there's still hope.
This is an historical moment. First time that Air India landing in Israel, and first time that the skies of the Jewish land and the most Arab important land, Saudi Arabia and Israel, are connected together through the flight of Air India. And from here, I sure and I wish that all the sky will open, including the fact that El Al and the other Israeli aviation companies could fly direct Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries.
All right, now it is time for Emmanuel Kadosh's Top 5.
Fashion Week in Tel Aviv is behind us, and with that comes all different types of innovations presented at the shows. Well, I'm here to give you guys the top 5 innovations found at the Tel Aviv Fashion Week. Number 1 on our list, 3D pattern making. Made in Israel, Optitex software allows designers to perfect their garments before sewing or cutting by combining 2D designs with 3D pattern making. Through this partnership with Optitex and one of Israel's best design schools, Shankar, students are able to update their skills as often as the software updates. 3D printing is the new thing, people. Second on our list is brought to us by Israeli textile designer Moriel Dezaldeti. Moriel developed a textile technique that blurs the lines between 3D art objects and clothing by combining knitting and weaving with modern techniques such as laser cuts and digital embroidery. Using this technique ultimately creates unique, timeless designs. Third up is the twine solution. The textile industry is responsible for 20% of the world's water pollution, which is where the Petah Tikva-based startup comes in. Twine solution enables on-demand textile thread dyeing in an eco-friendly process that requires no water. The technology behind this is unbelievable and helps eliminate dead stock and other waste costs. Doesn't get much better than that. Fourth on our list comes from the Israeli designer Stav Hoffman. This young designer is taking embroidery to the next level. Instead of sticking with the traditional embroidery methods, Stav used synthetic hair to create intricate floral patterns and braiding. Hoffman even won first prize in the London's Hand and Lock embroidery competition just last year for her unique designs and technique. Last but not least is brought to us by another young Israeli designer, Dana Cohen. Cohen focuses on sustainability as well as giving new life to old textiles by collecting used fabrics, shreds them to make soft, felt-like materials for her collections. Fun fact about this young designer, she even used 5 NASA photographs to guide the patterns of the green, red, and pink felts. Now that's just thinking outside the box. That's all for today's Top 5. Back to you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.